actually were studying mechanical engineering when you were in college. How did that happen? And, like, did that ever come in handy as of the experience itself?
Yeah, I think it actually comes in handy every day. But how it, I guess, sort of happened was, all through high school, I grew up in a small town. I was always really good at math and science. So I wasn't going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Unfortunately, my parents were probably a little disappointed, but engineer was sort of next best thing. So, applied to a lot of liberal arts engineering schools, or some of the top tier engineering schools in the country. Decided to go for a little smaller liberal arts college in the end. And after a couple years of engineering, I realized as much as like math and science were my strengths back in high school, like it was not something I wanted to do forever, especially like as a career. And I'm pretty sure my professors noticed that too. So yeah.
So you grew up under parents who had a Chinese restaurant F&B business as well. And I remember reading one of your interviews that actually taught you not to be in the F&B business because
Yeah.
how hard it is to run a restaurant, right?
When you grow up like as an F&B kid, especially like where I'm from, my parents worked 7 days a week.
Which city were you in?
I grew up in a really small town in New Hampshire called Keene.
Okay.
25,000 people
Yeah.
in the whole city. 1 million in New Hampshire, like the whole state. Coming from or most people that I meet in Hong Kong don't really have a grasp of like what that's like, growing up in such a small town. But so my family were like business owners. We owned a few different restaurants. But that life, is 7 days a week, 12 hours a day on your feet. It was just, it was a grind. It was a hustle for my parents.
Right.
They did that, I guess, to give me the opportunities that I had, to be able to sort of get where I am today. But watching it, you never sort of aspired to have to work that hard, physically, I guess, like just takes its toll. And then I don't think they ever wanted me to sort of have to do that, right? I don't think they would have deterred me, and I think they're very happy with sort of what my path is right now, but never would have imagined it, I guess.
After graduating college, you went into Ralph Lauren, starting with a management trainee program,
Yeah.
and ended up staying there for 10 years, and went to Apple in San Francisco, Silicon Valley for 2 years, and then you said, okay, this is the end of my corporate job. What kept you passionate about working in the corporate world, and what made you leave those jobs?
So I was quite lucky in the beginning. I was an intern at Ralph Lauren even before I joined the management training program. Having an engineering and business background is not typically what Ralph Lauren recruits or looks for. Fortunately, by the time like I was applying for jobs and things like that, they were also looking for more of like the business side. At that point, Ralph Lauren had just IPO'd, and they were really looking to expand and grow their business, and not so much purely on the fashion side, but also just as a big Fortune 500 company. So they were starting to recruit kids like me back then. And I was a great fit ultimately for the training program because they were also doing some like global business development stuff. So what kept me there for 10 years was just that it was always changing. At that stage, around in the 2000s of Ralph Lauren, they were growing the business internally, like by bringing like different business segments and brands back in-house, but also growing internationally by taking their licenses back, or even just like starting new businesses in different countries. So fortunately, with my background, I was always on the teams that were sort of recruited to do that within the company, and that's actually what brought me to Hong Kong. So I'm super grateful for the opportunities I had there. I wouldn't be sitting here today without it. I'm not from here. So when they asked me to come here for a 5-month project, I had never even been here before. So 5 months is easy. When you're working, it seems almost like a work vacation. It was kind of a no-brainer. So I landed here back in 2009, thinking I'd only be here for 5 years. Ended up obviously being much longer than that. So I stayed 5 more years with Ralph Lauren here in Hong Kong. At that point, just thought it's been a decade, maybe time to try something different. And again, very fortunate at that stage, Apple was recruiting a lot in the luxury retailing segment because they were also expanding their retail business.
Right. Yeah.
So like, even Hong Kong has like these massive Apple stores. They're really focused on bringing that sort of luxury, I guess really premium high-end experience to like consumer electronics, right? So they recruited very heavily for sort of where I was in my industry. And I actually moved to Shanghai to be sort of part of the Asia team, but spent a lot of my time, back in San Francisco and Cupertino during that time. That didn't last very long, definitely not 10 years like Ralph Lauren. I think I just learned really quickly that while I was, still relatively young, that maybe I could spend my time and energy working on something that I'm like super passionate about. Apple was an amazing company. I met a lot of incredible people. I learned a lot in a very short amount of time. But I think that experience combined with Ralph Lauren sort of having the fashion side and now a little bit more, I guess, like a disciplined, regimented side, like on the Apple front, because it's such a big company and so many amazing systems and processes in place. Almost balanced out sort of like my, I guess, like corporate professional career. I thought that was like a really good launch pad to try to start something. Motivation to leave Apple was I was starting a company with a couple of friends that I actually met here in Hong Kong, mainly in fashion again. So I think I had the itch after having left Ralph Lauren. Fashion has always been my passion, even like growing up. So it was something that allowed me to get back into fashion. Also allowed me to dabble a little bit in like streetwear and sneakers, which is like within fashion, like sort of my bigger passion. But then also make it, well, the idea was to also make it into, something lucrative and help other brands globally enter the Asia segment.
Right.
So it was quite a big project scope. We had some, quite big investors and sort of at that time, really big dreams, to
How did you get those investors?
I learned very quickly that in Hong Kong, there are just sort of unlimited resources if you know the right people here, which is really helpful, in some cases. And originally, when we started our company, we had quite a lot of confidence from a lot of different people. But fashion is a struggle. It's not an automatic thing to create a brand or even a concept in fashion and be successful, especially not right away. So we had a little bit of a slow start, slower than we anticipated. I think that spooked some of the people that we were working with, and ultimately we decided to sort of part ways. But I don't regret any of that. I learned a lot just as an entrepreneur. Like, again, working corporate for 12 years, you have quite a strong safety net. But when you go out on your own, that safety net's removed, right? So I think it was a good first sort of step into, I guess, what I eventually ended up doing.
Yeah. The last time we were talking, you actually mentioned that you're glad that it failed.
Yeah. Glad / I'm not disappointed that that original concept never sort of came to fruition. I think, again, it was a stepping stone and sort of put some of the right pieces in place for, what eventually became, like, I guess, my career. So.
And that sort of was a foundation for Cookie Department as well, right?
Yeah. That original concept had sort of an F&B, a very small F&B piece to it. So it wasn't sort of a jump straight into F&B. It was just kind of like dip my toes back in. I did have obviously a little bit of knowledge of it just growing up around it. So it was comfortable, but I didn't think it was going to be the primary piece of it. And it wasn't the intention at the time. So that is sort of where the ideas started flowing, and I also just started building confidence, I guess, in the industry itself, and also just how consumers, I guess, originally it was in Taipei, but started bringing the concept over here to Hong Kong, like how they would react to some of the stuff that I was like trying to create.
So I read that you were bringing cookies.
Yeah.
So the coffee shop that was inside your retail store was called Coffee Department.
Coffee department, yeah.
And you had sold cookies over there. And when you were visiting Hong Kong, you would bring cookies over.
Because we were just trying to build a cafe as part of our retail store. So again, creating that more lifestyle environment, also giving our customers a place to just relax and hang out before, after, their shopping. So coffee was the focus. But we sort of realized, okay, we need to offer something in terms of food. I grew up in the States. I was born and raised there. My idea of like snacks, treats, desserts is very different, from like the Asia standard, and specifically, I guess, back then, like the Taiwan, Hong Kong standard. So I wanted to create something that was my own. I have grown up, around ovens and friends, parents baking cookies and cakes for every occasion, or just coming home from school and having freshly baked brownies or chocolate chip cookies, on the counter. So for me, I've just always, when I arrived in Asia, I'd always baked at home, because you couldn't go to like a corner bakery or a corner deli and get, that home style cookie or cake or cupcake. So I decided, when, coffee department needed something that was, again, very much like us versus like what the community already had, to just put a cookie on the menu that I had been making back at home. Didn't realize, that there was sort of the starting point of what would eventually become Cookie Department. But
Hong Kong is known for desserts, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I read on news yesterday that Happy Bakery, which has been in Hong Kong for 45 years, they closed down the shop because of the rent price. They couldn't come into a negotiation with the owner of the place. But lots of places like Jenny Cookie.
Jenny Cookie, yeah.
Yeah, Koreans love it.
Yeah.
They always bring a tin can back home.
Yeah.
So what was your aspiration when you were doing a cookie business, like opening a cookie shop here, and how were your friends and families reacting to it?
I think what worked really well with Cookie Department was that it was never the focus. It was never, there was never pressure to create a cookie business. And I think that's, in the very early stages, what allowed it to just like really be like an organic cookie company that just grew based on like what the customers, or my friends, even like my family, wanted, right? We didn't have, it wasn't a big enough business, or it wasn't even like sort of significant enough to like force us to have to make decisions based on business, or based on revenue, or based on profit. Originally I was just making the cookies in my house, like in my own kitchen. So that allowed me to just make the cookies I really liked growing up, or the cookies I really missed from New York, or even just making cookies that incorporated different desserts or foods from like my travels. So there was no pressure. There was no need to make something that people needed or wanted. It was sort of, if someone asked me to make something, I'd be like, yeah, give me a week. Like, let me play around with it when I have some free time. And we'll see what we can do. Or if I was just like, you know what, I'm tired of eating chocolate chip today. What's another flavor that I haven't had in a long time, or that Hong Kong doesn't offer? And I was like, I never see like a red velvet cookie in Hong Kong, or very rarely. So let me work on that, so yeah, I think it was just the fact that it was just a very organic growth to it.
Yeah.
And
it sounds very enjoyable to be.
Yeah, it was fun, and my friends had input. It was really just a passion project in the beginning. So I never intended it to become an actual business.
That actually leads to my next question about how Cookie Department, of course the main product is cookies, but there are a lot of visual aspects that play around with it, and what actually makes the brand attractive. And it reminded me of Gentle Monster, how their product is sunglasses, but people go to their shop to enjoy the displays, have the retail experience, sort of that surreal kind of concept, and thought maybe you had it planned to merge that kind of your experience in fashion and luxury retail industry with F&B. What did you have in mind when you first started, like coming up with the concept and the design aspect?
Yeah, I think from the design perspective, Cookie Department was always meant to be really versatile. Um, Similar to what you were saying, the cookies or the sunglasses in General Monster's case is the actual product, but it's not necessarily the end of the experience, right? I never intended for Cookie Department to be just a cookie shop. I really wanted it to be able to have the ability to collaborate with other brands, for it to almost become, a premium sort of lifestyle, if you will, like cookie product that people were proud and excited to get their hands on. I think that a lot of that stems, from fashion, right? At the end of the day, fashion is also just clothing, but it's the brand you create around it, that gets people excited and interested. So we were fortunate; we were able to create a lot of hype around the cookies. I remember, I think people thought I did it intentionally, but we used to have drops, like cookie drops, just like you'd have sneaker drops, or
Yeah.
brands would drop certain exclusive items. Like, we had these limited time or limited edition drops just because I couldn't make enough cookies by myself. So it seemed like, oh, these are very exclusive, very limited, but it's really just because I didn't have either the oven space or the manpower, or because I was working full time doing
Yeah.
something else. But it created this sort of natural, supply deficit. And we're not talking tons and tons. We're just talking, a handful of people who want them. Maybe half of the handful of people could get them, right? So, but that just sort of started to scale. So even as the demand grew, and yeah, we maybe could create more cookies and stuff, it still wasn't enough, right? It was just somehow constantly the demand was always surpassing the supply. And that was fun to continue to sort of leverage, like as I was building the brand itself. So
Yeah.
creating like these super decadent photos of, at the end of the day, a cookie, almost like a teaser, and then people knowing like, oh, I really want that, but I might not be able to get it.
Were people lining up to get them?
Yeah, it blew me away. The first time we did an actual physical pop-up was at a food festival.
Yeah.
And I had never done anything like that in Hong Kong. I had never even really dabbled in the F&B industry in Hong Kong. So I had no idea what to expect. But we were invited to join, and it was a really easy plug and play. Like the kiosk and like the booth was already built, like along with a ton of other vendors and things like that. So it was almost like a training wheels kind of way to get into the industry, because they were already promoting all the foods and all the things like that. So I had no idea what volume we would do. It was like a 3-day like long weekend type of event. So I just estimated in my own head, I was way off, but like how many cookies we might need for the weekend. And we sold out in 2 hours on the very first day of all the cookies I had planned for the whole weekend.
How many cookies did you plan?
I don't remember the exact number, but it wasn't big. It was probably somewhere around like 400 or 500, cookies.
Still, 2 hours.
Yeah, 2 hours at the food festival. And it was strange. It wasn't even because anyone had heard of us. It was, I think, just because people who came initially grabbed a cookie, were walking around the festival or, with it. Other people saw it and were like, oh, where'd you get that? And then they would line up, or, very Hong Kong tradition is to wait in line for stuff. So once they saw a small line forming, people would get in line and be like, oh, what is this? I've never heard of this brand. I think the amazing part about Hong Kong is people love something new and exciting. And, I think we were just at the right place at the right time. Looking like people were looking for something new. Hong Kong has like these great F&B sort of trends, whether it's like egg waffles or bubble tea. And, back in 2018, it just happened to be cookies. And we just happened to sort of help kickstart that ride. So that was incredible for me. I had, never worked on anything myself, right, that like had such high demand so quickly, I literally left the festival in the middle of it to go to my kitchen and start making more cookie dough, so that we'd even have enough for like the evening portion of the day.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So, and then went back after the festival completely to make more cookies for the rest of the weekend. Even those weren't enough, we actually had to kind of ration it out. So that was my first hint that, okay, maybe, just maybe, like, I could turn this into a actual business.
Yeah.
Slowly, from that food festival, we were invited to do an actual pop-up, like a physical shop, not in a food festival, at Landmark. And to me, one of the team from the Landmark group, like Hong Kong Land, were looking for something new and exciting too, for their shops, for their mall. And to me, having lived in Hong Kong at that point, I guess for 8 years, Landmark to me was like,
Yeah.
it's the luxury, epitome of like shopping, right, in Hong Kong.
That's where all the luxury boutiques are.
Every luxury boutique,
Yeah.
all of the finance offices are surrounding it. All, like Michelin star restaurants, right, in Landmark. So it was a little bit sort of shell shocked and scared, about like trying to enter as this tiny cookie brand. I had never even built a kiosk or a cart or anything like that, because even this food festival, everything was built for us. We just had to do some signage and branding, but I didn't want to say no. I thought this would be it could be a really good opportunity, at least to learn and find out if Cookie Department really has legs.
Were there some intentional marketing tactics that you did? You mentioned about cookie drop and limited number of orders and all that, but you must have had something that you wanted people to experience.
We wanted to be known for that ultra decadent, your cheat day, your cheat meal, or just, I don't care, I just need a cookie today type of thing. So
Yeah.
I think we really benefited from that. Hong Kong is a stressful city, and it's so fast paced. If you can step out and pick up a cookie that will, brighten your day, that's an easy fix, right, for anyone.
So the more I talk to you, I think you're a genius, because you opened this business in 2018.
Yeah.
You make people fat,
Yeah. Yeah.
and now you're opening a gym to have people come in and lose all that fat.
Yeah.
Was that your
I wouldn't say that
intention?
was intentional, but I think it sort of follows a similar ethos just in general to like any of the projects I've worked on or started. Is I want to make sure I'm super passionate about it in general, and it's also just something that I do in my daily life. So obviously back then I was baking cookies, I was eating cookies, and it became a business. I knew. Well, I felt like I knew what people would want because I wanted it, right? I knew what I wanted at Cookie, and if people with my background, like expats or Westerners or anyone international, was missing that sort of experience, I was missing it too. So if I knew that I wanted it and craved it, that maybe other people did too. I think that was a big help. And then I think how the local community responded to it was, okay, we've never tried this concept, but all these friends of ours who have, like, whether it's somewhere else in the world or even within Hong Kong at Cookie Department, like, love it so much or have some nostalgia linked to it, like, maybe I should try it, so that was how we sort of captured that crowd in the very beginning, but then, onto sort of the other concepts and how they kind of have come full circle. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't necessarily like always in my mind in 2018 that 4 years from now, like, let me create a fitness concept to like shed all that cookie weight. I think it's just, again, similar to the cookie, like looking for gaps in the market. Not that there's not already fitness studios in Hong Kong, but what we're doing with Renation, I think, fills a little bit of a gap that Hong Kong doesn't quite have yet. It's more of a boutique concept of lifestyle fitness.
I love your confidence that if you like it, other people will like it. Where does that come from?
I mean, for me, I I love eating. I love food. And outside of the F&B world, if I'm passionate about something, like whether it's fitness concepts or even like things I like to collect, um, I'm sure I'm not the only one. I get inspiration from tons of people, tons of places. So I imagine because I'm inspired by quite a lot of people and what their passions are, and I follow quite a lot of people, whether it's in social media or even in real life, on like their projects, what they're doing. Um, if they're inspiring me and if they're literally guiding me towards things that I've never tried or never thought to experience, I hope that what I really enjoy and really like, other people would also find similar to me. It's just sort of becoming increasingly more and more fun as I get to know more and more people. More and more industry folks are willing to work with me, and or work together, I guess, and create stuff. I think that they also feel that Hong Kong is missing. So I love the F&B industry because everyone is really willing to work together. Fashion is moving more that way, but when I worked in fashion, it was very segregated, and these days I think everyone understands that we all kind of have to work together, especially the past few years. Times have been quite tough, and you're not going to make it on your own. So, especially in F&B, we've all really been supporting each other. And I'm super grateful for that, especially as one of the new kids on the block in F&B in Hong Kong in such a demanding environment, like like you mentioned, like Happy Bakery and stuff like that. Like nothing's guaranteed here, in even cookie department. I don't take for granted like how we got here, and I also don't take for granted that we may not be here tomorrow. So I work really, really hard, literally every day, trying to make sure that we are here tomorrow or next week or hopefully next year.
That's really good to hear, especially after the Bagel War that happened last month in Hong Kong.
Yeah. That was interesting.
Well, I think you are one of the people that I think have connected the dots in their life very beautifully. What might seem quite separated, you were able to take that experience from the past to utilize in the next one and create your own identity and your values. If you go back to high school when you were thinking, okay, doctors are not going to work probably, and lawyers not, and probably engineering, would you have done differently to start how you started your career, or going to college and all that?
Being from a small town and being one of the only Asian kids in that town, I think really prepares you for a lot. It also created a really friendly environment for me to kind of grow. So, when you're in a small town and you're one of the only Asians, you sometimes don't know you're one of the only Asians. It's hard to discriminate against, like the Asian kid when like there's only one or only two. So, I grew up sort of half and half. It was like I felt comfortable because there wasn't a lot of discrimination, but I also needed to, I guess, work a little harder because I was the only Asian, right? And I didn't quite fit in the same way that like all the rest of my friends did. So I don't think I'd do anything particularly different. I really did as much as I could, as that sort of trying to be that good Asian student, like to make my parents proud, to eventually get out of my small town and go do sort of like bigger things. So and then even in college, I think the engineering background really comes in handy these days. A lot of people I encounter in fashion or now in F&B have been in fashion or F&B most of their careers or even their whole careers. I'm super grateful to have had over a decade of corporate life to really, for me, not that it has to be something for everybody, but for me, it's the foundation of what I do every day, the analytical side, the sort of more regimented side, that I can then combine with the more freestyle side, right? So I think only having one or the other isn't always like a recipe for success. I think for sure for me, having a little bit of both sides of the world has helped me quite a lot.
You mentioned about the safety net. When you do your own thing, you're losing that safety net, and of course, you're not sure whether you're going to be making the same dollar figure,
Yeah, yeah.
right? What kind of tips do you have for people who have that fear of jumping into a different industry or the next career step, or do something on their own?
I would say, especially during these times, everyone says, "Oh, you should take a risk," and like I would say, don't risk it all. And you don't have to these days,
Yeah.
especially now, like with being able to work from home, like if you're with a corporate job, um, being able to do freelance work, like always sort of have some options out there.
Mm.
Um, if you can start your own project or your own side business, your own side hustle, while you're also working for someone who's going to pay you, for a full-time job or even a part-time job, do that.
Mhm.
Don't quit your job and take your savings and invest it all into, a business and cross your fingers just because you're working really hard and hope that it works.
Mhm.
Um, Nothing wrong with that, but that just wouldn't be my recommendation. I
Yeah.
think you can do both. And when you get to that tipping point of, okay, now I need to spend more time on my project because it's either at that stage where it's going to be make or break, or it's at that stage where the more time I put in, the more money I can make, or the more success I can bring.
Mhm.
Um, that's the new safety net, I guess, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is keep working, keep having someone else pay you while you're building your own business.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, obviously, if you're doing it on your own time. So yeah, I would say this day and age, like with the way that work, like corporate work happens, like you can much more easily do both um, than like 10 years ago or whatever when I started doing it, where everything was just like you're always in the office, like you're always working on your job, you're always traveling, you're always on conference calls. Like it would have been much more difficult back then. You would actually have to like separate, like I did, like where I left um, my company to go start another company. But I think these days you could probably balance both, at least in the beginning.
I hope my boss doesn't watch this. Before you came, I asked you whether you can bring one naked truth that you've never shared anywhere before, whether it's personal or about your business. I think you had enough time to think about it.
Yeah, I thought about it on the way here, what I'd be comfortable sharing, and also what I'd be comfortable sharing that people might even find remotely interesting. So nothing like super crazy or anything, but what I don't think I've actually ever shared is that um, I actually really want to go to Mars. um,
Oh.
yeah, so this has nothing to do with my work or passions in general. Like within this lifetime, within my lifetime, if there's like a passenger commercial flight to Mars, or trip, I guess,
Uh-huh.
to whether it's to recolonize or to start the very first cookie shop, on Mars, I would go. If even if there wasn't a return trip, like if it was, we're going and it's available, and obviously, if I had the means, like to travel
Mhm.
there, like however much that costs, I would go. I think
Well, you should write a letter to Elon.
I know. I think hopefully, as like these different careers progress,
Yeah.
maybe I'll start moving towards that direction. But um, I don't want to become too crazy like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It's just always been a thing. I've always been interested in space in general, and it was never part of my career or anything like that. I'd always wanted to go to space camp, when I was little, but I never was able to. So yeah, now with like space travel and all that stuff being more in the news and just more like part of daily conversations, um, that's something I definitely would do.
Well, maybe next month we'll see a Mars
Yeah,
inspired
yeah.
concept cookies.
I think maybe in a decade from now we'll look back on this conversation and
For
maybe
sure.
it'll be a possibility. So yeah, you never know.
Anything is possible.
Yeah, I hope so.
And that's how the cookie crumbles. I wanted to do that so
You wanted to say that really badly.
I've
Yeah.
been waiting for weeks. Well, thanks, Will, for coming today and talking to me. That was
Yeah.
really great.
Thank you.